We are continuing in First Timothy. Thanks, Alan, for covering last week. I know you guys spent some time talking about elders and deacons, and I'm not going to rehash what Alan said. I want to harken back to it as we go forward into chapter 4 as well, at the end of chapter 3 and chapter 4. Um, but as a review, what did you guys talk about last week with regard to elders and deacons? What were some of the things that you remember from that conversation?
We talked about how a lot of deacons in this church over the years were a stepping stone to becoming an elder.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, one of the reasons I'm an elder today is because I was a deacon for a long time. And I think if I hadn't served as a deacon in that period and helped me develop, I wouldn't be an elder today.
Okay.
So I'm not saying it's an automatic stepping stone, but it seems to be. Good training ground.
Often it is, yes. Yeah, good. And it does that it's interesting to see some of the comparisons, some of the things. One of the things I want to look at tonight is what are some of the characteristics that seem to carry over from category to category here in this discussion? What are some of the things that seem to uh, be included in all of these categories? Elder and deacon and the women, whatever that is, and just what are some of the things that seem to recur? Um, and I think one of the reasons that often deacons become elders is because they spend some time developing some of these characteristics even more
And they
deeply.
work with the elders.
Yes,
So you're working back and forth. So in a way, it's training ground, I think. The way God set it up.
right.
Doesn't have to be that way. We've had other men come in and be elders without, let's say, Steve, he was here, right, for a short time. He could have gone right into being an elder, we didn't have to have him as a deacon, but, well, there are men that have the right experience that could become elders right away. They have the qualifications.
So, yeah, one of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight is I want us to look at some of the categories, some of the qualities that seem to run throughout these three categories of people, and from there, I want to go into the rest of chapter 3 and into chapter 4. But I want you to think about um, this question. What is an elder or deacon or the category of women here? What are they to have that other Christians aren't supposed to have? What's supposed to be true of them that is not true of other Christians? Does that make sense? Is there anything in these categories that you don't expect from other believers as well?
They have to be married.
Okay,
And
well,
have faithful,
it assumes it does.
children
It
and wives and all that stuff.
it assumes marriage. Yes. Okay. The category, the descriptions here assume marriage, and not all Christians are married. What else?
Have children and have total control of your children.
It assumes a family, the control of your children, or that your children are uh, not running rampant, right? They're and it's interesting some of the expectations, how they vary at different times. You've got your own family, see that his children obey him for the elders in chapter 4 or verse 4. You've got manage his children and household well in verse 12. I don't know that those two things are particularly separate, but they're both mentioned that these people are people who have families and are in more or less control of those families, or at least that the families are managed well, is one of the ways Paul talks about it. What else? What else is here that is exclusive to elders, deacons, and the category of women here? that would not be expected of other
I
Christians.
think there is. I'm, I'm looking at, it says that the elders should be temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, not violent, not given to drunkenness, and then deacons, kind of the same thing. But really, all Christians should be observing those things. I mean, the elders and deacons might be, more expected to set a good example
Yeah.
for the people in their under their, I guess deacons don't really have authority, but under the elders' authority, they should be good examples for them to show them how, but really all of that stuff is something that every Christian should exhibit as an example to non-believers, to make them say, hey, look, there's something about that person. How you hear a lot of people say, oh, religious people, they're just hypocrites because they act a certain way in
Right.
church, but then they go out and they do all kinds of sinful things. But we should say, hey, no, I mean, that's not the way we live, and show it in what they see. So I don't know that there's anything there that other Christians don't have to do. I mean, except for the thing about being married,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. The family situation. The only other one I could see that I think is apt to teach. I think by teaching, able to teach. I think by teaching there, it's more than just you can share the gospel with someone. It really is a more in-depth sort of understanding of the faith that maybe not every Christian would have, at a given point. Because we're all in progress, right? We're all growing in these things. I think the expectation is really that elders, deacons, this category of women, that they have this not perfected, but they have these characteristics. They're evident in their lives. They're consistent with them. There's a maturity about them that is noticeable and that is undeniable. And I think that's kind of what Paul's getting at, because as you said, Diana, all of these things mostly it's something that as Christians we ought to all aspire to anyway. There are categories, whether we ever have an intention of being elders or deacons or whatever. I think these are all things that we should aspire to. It's not any different there's not like a different standard for elders. It's just the consistency of it and the maturity of it that I think is what Paul is looking for here. And I think that's kind of an important thing to note, that that we're not off the hook. If we're not an elder or a deacon, we're not off the hook on these things. These are characteristics that all of us ought to be aspiring to. Above reproach, right? Blameless. Even somebody who wants to find something against you is going to have a hard time. None of us are perfect. None of us are totally above reproach all the time, I'm sure. But just the idea that people can dig and they're not going to find a lot of stuff on you. There's not anything there that is blameworthy. Faithful to his wife, faithful to your spouse, the husband of one woman, the wife of one husband. The idea of just you keep your promises to your spouse and you're faithful to them. In all ways, in every way. Temperate. Our world needs people who are a little more temperate, right? We don't need to be flying off the handle all the time. As Christians, we're supposed to be people who have our passions and our emotions and our impulses under the control of our Lord, and so we're not. We're not flying off the handle. Self-control, that's another kind of same thing, right? Respectable, hospitable. Literally, the word is lover of strangers. It's a compound word, lover of the stranger. A person who who you're welcoming and you're willing to help, especially in a culture where you had to, you depended upon the kindness of strangers sometimes. Well, Christians ought to be the kindest of strangers in those situations. Not given to drunkenness, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money, the management of the family, right? A manner worthy of full respect. By the way, that word for full respect there comes up in each of the categories in some form or the other. That's a word that goes across those three categories. Must not be a recent convert because he shouldn't become conceited and fall under the same judgment of the devil. Must have a good reputation with outsiders. Who are outsiders in that case?
The unchurched.
Yeah, unchurched, the non-Christians, the not yet Christians. Yeah.
I think we could safely say the elder or the deacon is the person that's further down the road than, the average member of the church, spiritually speaking.
Yeah, there ought to be some.
Now, they've gone down the path and they're ahead of us.
Yeah.
So they're setting a good example.
Yeah, there ought to be some spiritual maturity, some consistency in these characteristics. And that's why it isn't necessarily, it's not always just a function of age, right? Some people take longer to learn than others. But there is this expectation of this consistency throughout. Deacons, very similar. Verse 9, they must keep hold of the mysteries of the faith, literally, the deep truths of the faith with a clear conscience. They must first be tested. I've always wondered, how are they to be tested? I think it probably has to do with, entrust some things to them and see how it goes. And maybe we need to do more of that in church, entrust things to people and see how it goes, and you learn a lot about somebody when you entrust something to them,
So you do when you appoint a deacon, you give him some responsibility, and he is tested, what's handling the money, handling the building, going to the nursing home, whatever it is, they get a responsibility, and you can tell after a while whether they can handle it or not,
Yeah, if you skip on down to the verse 12, then deacons, again, faithful to your wife, manage your children and household well. The women in verse 11, whether you understand that as the wives of the deacons or a different order of women of some in some capacity in the church, they're to be worthy of respect and not malicious talkers, but temperate and trustworthy in everything. So all of these characteristics are, I think, things I think that all of us should aspire toward. Paul is very concerned that the life of the church will be a good witness to the world around us of the gospel, the truth of the gospel. And so I think that's really kind of what's at the heart of these characteristics. And I just think it's interesting because we think of a CEO has some skills that not everybody has, right? A doctor, a lawyer has some skills, has some education, has some resources that not all of us have. We have people in leadership often, because they have these, they've attained certain qualifications, they've attained certain education or particular skills, and it's really interesting to me that in the church, it's not that educational attainment. It's not that. It is, are you consistent in these characteristics that every Christian ought to be aspiring to? Are you somebody we can look at and go, yeah, that's how we ought to be. Something like that is how we ought to be. Knowing that none of us are perfect, knowing that nobody is the perfect role model except Jesus. It's like what Paul said, right? Follow me as I follow Christ. Things I do that reflect Jesus, do that. But anything else, just throw out. But elders, deacons, the people who are in these positions, the women in this case, they have these characteristics that everybody should be aspiring toward and respectful of and appreciative of. Characteristics that
Somebody,
help the church then in their witness to the world. Yeah, Jacob.
why a husband of one wife? That means some people do have two wives or three. Somebody is shaking their head.
It may be a way of talking about faithfulness to your wife. It's not necessarily a polygamy kind of thing, because polygamy was not common in the Greco-Roman. When Paul's day, polygamy was not common at all. Old Testament, but polygamy in Paul's day was not common at all, as I understand it. So it may very well be a way of talking about just, and a lot of the English translations now will say faithful to their wives. They're not
You
philandering.
see, you see, in your culture, you put it that way. But if you come to my culture, it's not that way.
Yeah.
So the word Paul used here goes straight Broadway because in our side, we do marry two wives, three wives, if you are capable yourself. Christianity brought us to one wife.
Mhm.
That is we, because of what we study.
Mhm.
Some people are there who married two wives before getting, to the church.
Yeah.
After getting to the church, what do? Will you do away with one wife and keep the other wife? This became very serious topic.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I should have, yeah, I should have realized what you're talking about there. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, because I mean, what do? You just cut that one wife loose without any
Uh-huh.
support. You've made this promise to her. Now you just pick a wife and then cut the other one loose. That's hard. That's a tough situation. So how do you manage that situation? That's a hard call. That's tough. I know a
Very
lot of,
hard,
yeah, I know a
very,
lot
very
of,
hard.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know that's a tough situation.
You
Yeah,
see?
yeah.
So people like that, Paul see all these things because of a spirit that dwell in him him to write these things down straight to them that this is what happened. But you can't tell the fellow that no, you have two wives, you cannot be a Christian. No,
Yeah.
you have two wives, you have to do away with your wife before being a Christian. No,
It's tough. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
tough.
I mean, that's hard. Yeah.
You see?
Yeah. 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 Good. Yeah. So it does take on a little different meaning, I'm sure, in a culture where polygamy is more common. I'm sure it's yeah, that text sort of speaks differently to you, doesn't it? It speaks the same way, but the implications of it are tougher to, tease
It
out.
still goes on in our country though. You go to Utah, there's still Mormons that take on many wives.
It's
It
not,
might be illegal.
not
They
officially
still-
sanctioned by the church. Yeah.
They still do it. Sometimes live out in the country on kind of independent living.
Yeah, there are some sort of isolated sects of
They're still out there.
Latter-day Saints.
We were out there a
Yeah.
couple years ago.
Anyway, good points, and just sort of one of the things I just wanted to draw out here is as we're moving into this sort of talk about the way that people ought to be conducting themselves in God's household. The elders, the deacons, are just the examples of what that's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And so so good. And I appreciate, Jacob, very much your point there, because that's a really interesting and I'm sure very difficult thing to iron out sometimes in churches where in cultures where polygamy is more common. So a good reminder that sometimes we see the text just sort of through our own eyes and what's easy to us and what's familiar to us. And
Yeah.
if we lived in a different place, we might see some things pretty differently. And if our experiences are different, we often see the text in a different way.
What is the better translation of the verse 11? In the same way their wives, mine says, are to be women, and then the note, or deaconesses. So what
So
the better is?
the debate is deaconess is an assumption as well. The debate is over the word gunaikos. You hear like gynecology. You hear uh, the debate is over that word because you can speak if you're talking about a group of people's wives, you could say they're gunaikos. They're women, literally. Or if you're just talking about a group of women, you can say women, gunaikos. And so the question is, what does Paul mean there? Presumably Timothy knows what he means because he's familiar with the church. He's either talking about he's talking about some group of women. That's obvious. The fact that it's between qualifications of deacons makes some people think he's talking about the wives of deacons. Makes other people think he's maybe talking about a particular order in the church or group in the church of women who maybe are widows who are under the support of the church. And some assume he means female deacons by using that. So it's the reason that it's uncertain is we don't know, and it just depends on who these women are that Paul's referring to.
So the word up in verse 8 that's translated deacon, and in verse 12, deacon. The word, whatever it is in verse 11, translated wives or deaconesses, it's not related at all?
It's not related at all to the word for deacon.
Okay.
Now,
because that would
just to throw a little spin on things, if you're interested, Phoebe in Romans is referred to as a deaconess or a deacon, a deacon, really. So she's referred to with that same word. But the problem there is that same word also means servant. So it can have the meaning of sort of this office or this position, for lack of a better word, in the church, or it's also sometimes just used to refer to a servant. So is Phoebe a deaconess of the church in Cenchrea, or is she a deacon of the church in Cenchrea, or is she a servant of the church in Cenchrea? That's the question there. So yeah, so make of that what you will. It's just interesting. Paul includes this group right there between qualifications for deacons. He includes this group and has some character qualifications for them as well. And it's totally a matter of opinion as to who that is and what that is exactly. We just don't know. That makes sense. Okay.
There's not much said about the qualifications of wives of elders.
Yes, exactly. That's one of the reasons some people say, well, it can't be wives of deacons because surely we'd have something for wives of elders too. Maybe it's wives of both of those groups, both elders and deacons, but it's a strange place for it because it's right there between, in the middle of the qualifications for deacons. So it can go round and round, and there's a ton of ways to argue it. And we really just don't know 100% what we're talking, who that is that Paul's referring to. Okay, so let's jump on then into verse 14, where Paul says to Timothy, although I hope to come to you soon, I'm writing you these instructions so that if I am delayed, you will know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of the truth. in Paul's time, and before Paul's time, philosophers often would teach, the kind of life you ought to be living. And all the philosophers had, ideas about what kind of life you ought to be living. There were the Stoics, and there were what were the opposite of the Stoics? The Epicureans. There were all sorts of different philosophies about, and all of it was how to have a happy, effective, productive life. It wasn't religion per se. It was just kind of, you know, uh, life coach. The philosophers were the first life coaches. Let's say, and their job, that what they're doing is they're teaching people how to organize their lives so that their lives are not random and are not scattered, but they're focused and they're productive and they're happy. Unless you're a Stoic, then you're not supposed to be happy. And so there's all sorts of different philosophies here, but all of them have something in common, and that is that all of them have what was called a household code. And the household code is, here's how you are to conduct yourself in your home, and here's how you should control. Here's how you should order your household. Here's the way you should treat your wife. Here's the way you should treat your children. Here's the way you should treat your servants. Notice it's very male focused, right? Because it was the males who were all the students of the philosophers. Here's how you should treat these important relationships in your life, because if you get this right, then everything else starts to fall into place. So that was a common way of teaching. Paul uses it a couple of places in his letters. In Colossians and Ephesians, both, he uses sort of the structure of the household code to teach the churches, but he throws a couple of spins in there. So when Paul talks here about you will know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, he's sort of using the household code as a way to talk about, we got something bigger even than our own homes, and we have the family of God. We have God's household, the church that we're supposed to be living our lives in and for and with. And so here's how you should behave. And that's what Paul's saying here. I'm writing you this so you'll know I'm writing you a household code for the church. And this is how you ought to be behaving. And it's what came before, right? Is part of that. The statements, the characteristics of those leaders that are supposed to be what we all aspire to. If we have leaders that have admirable qualities that we can all aspire to, it will help the church to prosper in the world. So this is very much, being conscious of our lives in the context of the church, how we're behaving in the church, and how the church as the household of God behaves in the world, so that people can look. Sort of what Diana talked about, people can look and say, I like that. I like the way they're living. I don't understand everything, but I like the way they're living. I like I like the qualities that I see in them, and it's something I aspire to. So that's what he says. I want to come to you, but I'm writing these instructions so that if I'm delayed, you'll know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household. I'm not sure we think so often about the way our behavior, how we live our lives, how that affects the church. This is an understanding of the church that is kind of foreign in our country. You're Wednesday night people, you probably get it, but how there's we kind of tend to think of ourselves as these independent units, right? And maybe our own families and Paul's wanting us to see the bigger connections that we have, and the fact that our lives all intersect with one another, and so how we choose to live our lives individually, affects how we live our lives together, affects how the church behaves and is seen in the world. Because he says the church is the pillar and foundation of the truth. What does that mean to you? The church is the pillar and foundation of the truth. I don't know. It's a little bit surprising to me. If you think about it, we believe Jesus is our foundation, right? How has the church suddenly become here the pillar and foundation of the truth?
Well, this says pillar and support of the truth. I think that the point is, if the church is not standing for God's will, how's anybody gonna understand what it is?
Okay. Yeah. If we're not, if people can't see in the church what God's truth is, and we're going to talk about that too. If they can't see that in the church, where are they going to see it? That's a really good way to put it. Where are they going to see the gospel? Where are they going to see the truth of God, if not among us? And I suppose you could argue, well, you could see, but I think Paul kind of feels like that it's within the church that supposedly people see the truth. It's very similar to what Jesus said when he said, "People will know that you're my followers if you love one another." That connection, that relationship of love and unity in the church is testimony to who we follow, to the one we follow. And then he talks about that truth when he says in verse 16, beyond all question, the mystery from which true godliness springs. That's a wordy way to put that. It's literally beyond all question. The mystery of godliness is great. He appeared in flesh, was vindicated by the Spirit, was seen by angels, was preached among the nations, was believed on in the world, was taken up in glory. So he's talking about the truth. He's talking about the mystery of godliness. What's the mystery? Does he mean that godliness is a mystery and we just can't figure it out? Is that what he means? What's the mystery of godliness?
I got to know here, it says the attitude of God. Really getting at God's attitude.
Okay.
We see it in church.
It's godliness, right? What's that mystery part?
Well, God, there's always some mystery about God.
Okay.
We never fully understand him.
I think more
You can't
wonder,
understand his mind.
wonder.
Okay. Wonder. Actual mystery. It's often used as a technical word. It's the word is actually no. Yeah, mystery of God. Yeah, mystery of godliness. Mystery often is used as something used of something that we would not know except God has revealed it. That's what often in the New Testament, when you see that word mystery, what it means is this is something that you would not be able to figure out on your own, but it's fortunate then that God has revealed it to us. And so the mystery of godliness, the revelation of this thing that we couldn't figure out on our own, and it begins He, which I think is really interesting. He talks about this mystery of godliness, and you think, all right, he's going to tell us some really secret, esoteric teaching that, and what he says is He appeared in the flesh, was vindicated by the Spirit, was seen by angels, was preached among the nations, was believed on in the world, was taken up in glory. So what is the mystery of godliness? What is the truth of which the church is the pillar and ground? What is it? Jesus. if that's a little underwhelming, it's because maybe we don't really fully comprehend what that means. But when Paul wants to talk about the truth that the church proclaims and the unveiling of godliness, where does godliness come from? How do we get to that place where we're godly people? He begins with he. He begins with Jesus. And so what does he say about Jesus? 6 things.
And then he starts a song here.
It is a song. It is probably a song or a hymn or some kind of poetry that he uses here. Probably, we don't know that for sure, but probably. But what does he say about Jesus?
He had a human body.
He appeared in the flesh, right? He appeared, right? If it's not he was, and actually literally it's more like he was revealed in flesh. And I think that's really important to think about, especially around Christmas time, right? That Jesus was revealed in flesh. He wasn't revealed in like this glorious flash across the sky. He wasn't revealed in power. He was revealed in flesh as a baby. So when God wanted to reveal the mystery of godliness, he began with flesh, and he began with a baby. Appeared in the flesh, but wasn't just flesh, right? So what else do we see there?
Vindicated by the Spirit.
Vindicated by the Spirit. Vindicated makes you think of the resurrection for sure. Maybe Paul also has in mind all the things that Jesus did in the power of the Spirit, right? And the miraculous things that he did, and the ways in which God did reveal his glory throughout his ministry. There are those flashes, most of the time Jesus just seems like some normal dude, but every now and then something happens, he heals somebody, or he raises somebody from the dead, or he's transfigured on the mountainside, or God speaks about him and to him. So there are times in which he is vindicated by the Spirit. Those who opposed him are put in their place because he is from God. Was seen by angels. I think of the angels that sustained him in the desert, and I think of the angels that sang about him before he was born. Vindicated by the Spirit, seen by angels, preached among the nations, believed on in the world, and was taken up in glory. Yes, May.
Question. Jacob's statement still is ringing in my head because I'm trying to understand. When we become Christians, whatever we were before, we leave it there because we're now new in Christ, correct?
Yeah, you're talking about the Jacob, why don't you address that? Why don't you address that, Jacob? Why is it not so easy just to say, well, we just leave behind that other wife?
Come again.
May was asking about your statement about when somebody who has 2 wives becomes a Christian.
Okay.
Is it just you just leave that? Aren't you supposed to leave behind what you were before you were a Christian? Why is that a struggle? Why is that harder than it seems?
Yeah. Like I was saying, it became a very strong issue, a very difficult one for the church to deal with, because people became Christian while they married 2 wives. Some has 3 wives with their kids. After they married, they got baptized. And then what happened? During the teaching, some of them, the beautiful thing that they do is they do come with their wife to the church. and the teaching continue, it has come a point, the wife see that, where we are, the second, third wife see that where we are, it seems that we are the breakers of the home. That's not how God wanted. So we don't want to be part again. We want to, separate from the man. And the church would support you to, separate that woman with the kids. The kids, you take care of them, you provide for them, but you don't have any. If the woman has any man to marry, he can go and marry with an understanding. That's
Okay.
what he did.
That's what I wanted to, that's what I wanted to hear.
It's a support issue. It's a support issue.
I can understand that there may be financial responsibilities that have to still be,
Yeah.
you can't continue in that.
No, and he mentioned before talking about being separate from the wife in that sense. But there is this
I
this real
understand that
struggle.
there may be there has to be a financial responsibility for something you created.
Yeah.
But you can't continue in that relationship.
Mhm.
In some cultures, it's even, I think it's so, there's such a taboo about a divorce, and that sometimes I think, I understand at least that sometimes Christian men remain married in a sense to more than one wife, but they're only intimate with one, if that, and that's probably even debatable. So it's an interesting struggle. It's not so
A very interesting
as we
struggle.
tend to
Very,
think.
very interesting struggle.
Yeah. So anyway, I hope that helps. I figured Jacob could explain that better than I could. So Jesus incarnate, Jesus in the flesh, Jesus vindicated by the Spirit in resurrection, in his miracles and the things that he did, seen by angels, preached among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory. Some people don't think that's the ascension because it's out of order. I think it's because Paul's doing a little, or the hymn is doing a little something different than chronological order. And the verb taken up there is used several times to refer to Jesus' ascension. So I don't see any way around that being the ascension. But it's this, he's come to the earth, right, in flesh, and he's taken up in glory. By the way, that's our aspiration too, right? To come in flesh, but taken up in glory with him.
It's interesting, he doesn't mention though the central teaching or central part of our belief that Jesus died on the cross for our sins. Doesn't mention that.
I believe that Paul would say the central teaching of our faith is that Jesus was raised from the dead. I think he would say that. I think he would say, well, I think that's vindicated by the Spirit. I think that's the idea. I think it's a contrast between flesh and spirit. He came in the flesh, not a contrast, but a mention of flesh and spirit. He came in the flesh, but he was not just flesh. And when he went the way of all flesh and died, he was vindicated by the Spirit. He was raised from the dead. I think the death of Jesus obviously is important to Paul and matters.
I just think you had mentioned that instead of seen by angels.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's an interesting, and I think because he's using probably something that already existed in this, that he's sort of going with what whoever composed this wrote. He might, if he was doing it himself, he might do it differently. But yeah, it's an interesting choice of how, and if you sort of look at it, there's three couplets, right? Appeared in flesh, vindicated by the Spirit, seen by angels, preached among the nations. So, from heaven, the angels were observing and then on the earth among the nations, he was proclaimed. He was seen by the nations. He was seen by far beyond just his own countrymen. He was believed on down in the world and then taken up in glory. That's for Paul's purposes here. That's an encapsulation of the truth about which the church, is the pillar and ground. this proclamation, this unfailing proclamation of Jesus, his death, his life, his life, his death, his resurrection, the things he did, the things he taught, and the hope that we have in him, in his ascension and his eventual return, and the hope that his path from flesh, from revelation in the flesh to glory is our path as we follow him and are and share in his glory. But that has implications for the way we live. And I think that's the important thing that Paul wants us to understand, that this gospel that we believe is not just something we believe consciously. The gospel requires us to change, to act differently, to live differently. It requires us sometimes to love people we would never have imagined loving before. It requires us to sort of read a book years ago about the church called The Second Incarnation. And Paul really comes really close, if he doesn't step over the line, to calling the church the second incarnation of Jesus. If Jesus is present on the earth, if he's present physically, he's present in the church. And so what we do and the things we do are supposed to reflect his life and his death and his resurrection and the hope to which we aspire. So that's why we do the things we do. That's why we live the way we live, so that people can, through knowing us, can know Jesus and know the gospel and know this mystery of godliness. Godliness doesn't come from just trying harder. Godliness comes from living our lives in kind of, what's the word I'm thinking of? Living our lives as a reflection of the gospel of Jesus. And his presence on the earth and the things he did and said, and the things to which he leads us. That's where godliness comes from. That's how you become godly. It's not by working harder at just being godly. It's by more and more coming to reflect Jesus in your life. And that takes work, that takes effort, but it's not that we're developing godliness on our own. We're developing godliness as we develop in the image of Jesus.
Well, I think it's interesting to note that we're probably reading an early Christian hymn here. That's what scholars think. They probably sang that, put it to words or music somehow, and sang it at their services,
I actually heard a song a few years ago. Somebody wrote, somebody made a contemporary song out of this passage. It's a little hard to sing, but interesting effort. Yeah, it's likely some sort of pre-existing hymn or creed or all of the above, some confession of the content of the gospel. Here's what we believe. Chapter 4 then begins. The Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. So as he reinforces the truth, the gospel that the church should be upholding, he also says, don't be surprised, because the Spirit clearly says that there will be those who will abandon the faith and they'll follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such teachings come through hypocritical liars whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron. Paul does not mince his words about the people who are teaching something contrary to or conflicting with the gospel. And we're not going to get too deeply into that at this point just yet, but just note what he says about these hypocrite. They're hypocritical liars. So these are not people, I don't think, who are honestly mistaken, right? These aren't people who just are a little misguided and they got a little confused about something. Remember Apollos in Acts. Acts 17, I believe it is. Apollos is 18. Apollos is well taught in the scriptures. He believes in Jesus, but he's just a little deficient in some things. And so Paul's associates, Priscilla and Aquila, kind of bring him up to speed on some things. And they don't call him a hypocritical liar. They help him. They help him to learn. They help him to grow. Here we've got people who are not just mistaken, they are maybe pretending. Remember, Paul talks earlier on in this letter about people who want to be teachers of the law, but have no idea what they're talking about. They people who sort of are wannabes, right? They want to have this position, they want to have this authority and influence, but they don't know what they're talking about. All they want is that influence and power, and they're not that interested in the actual gospel. So there's a difference there, and it's probably helpful to note that because throughout the church's history, I'm sure people have used verse 1 to talk about everything they disagree with as being deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. And it's just not true. We often disagree with each other without somebody having to be demonic and hypocritical and a liar. So there's a distinction that has to be made. And we'll talk about that more next week as we talk a little more about the content of some of this teaching that Paul is combating, partially by telling Timothy, here's what you believe. Here's what you teach. Here's what you tell the church there. And here, that's a good way to resist false teaching, is by just proclaiming the gospel. Here's the gospel. Here's what the truth is. And so Paul wants him to know that, and then he's going to get into some of the content of this false teaching and how to respond to that. All right. Thanks, everyone. Any other comments? We got a minute.
Thanks, Patrick. How's your mom?
Better. Got a ways to go, but doing better. Thank you.
Good.
Appreciate the prayers. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.
Everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Get better, Linda.
Thank you.